This program is a presentation of WLCN 96.3 FM and WLCNonline.com. This live video stream is made possible by WLCN 96.3 FM and WLCNonline.com. This live video stream is WLCN 96.3 FM and WLCNonline.com. This live video stream is made possible in part by WLCN's live stream technology sponsor, Me Realty, located at 602 Keokuk Street in Lincoln, and online at merealty.com.
Viewpoint on 96.3 FM WLCN. Thank you for tuning in, listeners. Phone lines are open. If you have any questions, kudos, comments, if you'd like to know, please feel free to call in 217-648-5510. Today with us, we have a very special guest. Well, all of our guests are special, but I'm really excited because I have a hidden passion and love for aviation, and it came from Norm Clark. A lot of our listeners know Norm Clark from Lincoln, and he had a crop dusting business, and he had a chopper, and when I was a little girl, he gave me a ride in that chopper with no doors, and I fell in love right then and there. So, but anyway, today with us we have Larry Whitbeck, and Larry, you and I were visiting before we went on the air. You've lit a fulfilled, awesome life. I mean, you've basically seen, done, and did it all, so to speak. So, welcome.
Thank you. I'm still working on that. And I tell everybody that I was born loving airplanes. It was a birth defect I never got over and didn't want to. I mean, when I was 4 years old, I remember that Christmas, I wanted an airplane, and my father got me, or my mother probably, she got me a little plastic Bell 47 helicopter. Well, she didn't know the difference between a helicopter and an airplane yet in those days. Of course, being plastic and not powered, it made about 2 flights before it destroyed itself. But I have never had a time when I wasn't interested in airplanes. In high school, I loved airplanes, and I started going up to our local airport and cleaning the hangar for our local crop duster. And so I'd go up there and I'd take the big leaf rake and rake the tumbleweeds out. Out in western Nebraska, you get these thistles that we call tumbleweeds, and they break off and roll across the prairie, and they pile up feet thick up against the fences and in the buildings. So I'd rake them out, take them clear out to the road ditch, and then we'd burn them, because if you didn't, the same ones would be back in there 2 days later. So I'd work all summer cleaning up his hangar and burning bags and carrying chemical and washing the airplane. At the end of the season, after we got the booms all off of his J3 Cub, he'd take me around the patch for a while, and I'd get to hold the stick, and I thought I was a real pilot. You know? I was 13, and I never looked back. I got my pilot's license right out of high school. I went to college in Norfolk, Nebraska. I got the job at the airport because one of my buddies was working there, and he called me and said, "Do you want to work at the airport?" I said, "Absolutely." He says, "Well, I'm taking a job downtown at the newspaper because they pay a lot more." Well, they sure did, because the airport didn't hardly pay anything, but I wanted to be there. So I went up, interviewed, they hired me, and I worked at the airport there in Norfolk, Nebraska, as a line boy and mechanics apprentice for 2.5 years. I loved the job, so I worked after school, from the college I went to. Back in those days, everybody actually worked, unlike today, which almost no students work. And I graduated from 7 years of college without any debt, because I worked 3 jobs and paid my way through. Today, they get out of school and they owe $75,000 and they don't pay it back. The government statistics say that only 30% of those students make any effort at all at even paying their student loans. So they think you and I are supposed to pay them. Mm-hmm. That's all right. So I built my first airplane when I was 20 years old. It was a wooden experimental aircraft, and it was called a Peton pole. It was an all-wood airplane, and I built it out of white lumber. Actually, it was not hickory, sycamore, I believe.
Wow.
And I would go down to the lumberyard and I'd sort through piles of 2x6s until I found one that was close grained enough that met the specifications for aircraft lumber. I would buy that, cut it into longerons and cap strips and everything else from 7/8 of an inch square down to the cap strips which make your wing ribs, and those were a 1/4 of an inch by 3/8 of an inch. And so each one of those wing ribs had 89 pieces. Plus the gussets, and so you handmade each piece, glued it all back together, and you made 33 of those ribs to make a 32-foot wing. I built that in the mobile home that my wife and I lived in.
Oh my goodness.
So
oh my goodness.
It was so long that the building table went the full length of the living room, and the tail went underneath the kitchen cabinets. So she put up with a lot. I had my little tabletop jigsaw cutting out parts and gussets and nailing stuff, and I got a system down where I could build 3 ribs in 2 days. I'd glue up one in the morning, I'd take it out, flip it over, glue the other side, put that in the night, and do it the next morning. So in 2 days period, I would complete 3 ribs. So in theory, in 10 days, I could build all 33 of those ribs.
Oh my goodness.
I overhauled the Model A engine that went in the airplane in the house on a tarp, and I'm still married to the same woman.
Sounds like she's a saint.
She is amazing. She has put up with my airplane habit my whole life, but of course, I told her straight up, she knew this, I was a pilot before we got married. I said, do not expect me to not do anything that's not aviation. So in those early days, I had to buy all my own ratings, so I worked 2 or 3 jobs like I continued to do most of my life. I got my private pilot license in Norfolk. I then worked towards a commercial. You have to be 21 years old to get a commercial license.
Is that still true today to be 21?
It is still true today.
Okay.
In those days, you could get your commercial license first, and then you got an instrument rating. Today, they've changed the rules. You have to have an instrument rating first, and then get a commercial, which really makes sense because what commercial work can you do that's all visual flight rules? Mm-hmm. So I got that, and in those early days, I called it the rating game. If you wanted to get a job, you had to have the most education and all the ratings that the FAA had. So I started collecting ratings as fast as I could pay for them, which took me about 10 years. Consequently, when I started looking for a actual professional pilot's job, something other than instruction, I was a little bit older than everybody else because all the young people, their parents put them through aviation college. Well, my parents were unable to do that. I paid my own. That's all right. But I had a lot more experience, and I think I had a lot better judgment than the young people coming out of college. They graduate, they're 22 years old, they got their pilot's ratings, mom and dad paid for everything. They never had to turn a nickel to do it. So I got my first flying job, actually. I was a builder here in Logan County, and you may know that, but I built 22 homes in the 70s here in Logan County in central Illinois. So I was a well-known builder. I was one of the 5 largest contractors in Logan County. When the recession came, the first one, 79 and 80, I was out of work 2 winters in a row. So I thought, well, I can't make any less than nothing. Maybe I should look for a flying job because I couldn't get a flying job either. So I put an ad in the local rag that was for aviators, which was called Trade-A-Plane, which still exists today, looking for any kind of a professional pilot's job. So I get this call from a guy that works for a fishing company in Alaska. And he wants me to go to Alaska and fly DC-3s and DC-6s, hauling fish and crab and stuff, and be the co-pilot and the mechanic. So he wanted someone who's dual rated, and I was. I said, I am not going to Alaska. I'm freezing my butt off. Oh, no, you're going to love it. He says, we'll pay for everything. I mean, room, board, everything, Well, that's great, except I didn't know that room and board was throw your sleeping bag on the floor of the airplane and here's your bag, So you got a sack lunch and a piece of plastic to lay on the floor of the airplane. He called me and we talked for an hour. We had a lot of things in common. He had an airplane called a Stomp, STEMP, He says, oh, you have no idea what that is. He says, I know exactly what it is. Oh, you do not. So I described the airplane to him right down to the hump in the wing. He says, well, I guess you do. I said, I not only know what they are, I worked on one. I said, I haven't flown one, but it's just another airplane, isn't it? So, oh, no, they're really hard. I said, well, I doubt it. But anyway, we talked for an hour. He hung up. I said, no. He called me back 6 times. Every 30 minutes, he'd call me back, want me to come to work for him. Every time he called me back, he'd raise my salary $500. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I said, now, I'm going to hang my phone up and take it off the hook. You're not calling me back anymore tonight. We're done. He says, well, are you coming? I said, no. So the next morning at 5:30, he called me again, and then he offered me $3,500 a month. I wasn't making any money. I couldn't turn that down whether I wanted to or not. I said, okay, I'll be there. So I took my sea bag and my toolbox. I flew out to Seattle. I went to Arlington, Washington, where I worked on 5 DC-3s for a month to get them ready for their annual inspection to fly them to Alaska. So we got that done. I was up there for 9 months. I came back. Again, I was going to need a job. I got a job before I got home out of Chicago, Aurora, flying night freight on the Aurora airport. And I had a sleeping room in Sandwich that I told you about. So I did that for a year and a half, night freight up and down the Ohio River and up to Milwaukee and then over to Minneapolis. We were flying film at that time before they had the 24-hour development places. I would get all these bags of 35 millimeter film and we'd fill them to the ceiling in the airplane. I'd fly them to Faribault, Minnesota, and they developed them all overnight, put them in the little bags, put them back in the airplane. I took them back to Chicago and they took them to all of the different drugstores where they had collected them.
Oh my gosh, that's interesting.
So that was the Minneapolis run going north, which is a piece of cake, and I loved that job. I always liked flying at night. But then the guy that was doing the south route, which went clear, made 8 stops from Chicago to Fort Wayne to Indianapolis to Dayton to Cincinnati to Evansville to Louisville, back to Indianapolis and back to Chicago. So you made 9 or 10 landings every night. And it was grueling. And that Ohio River in the wintertime is what we call Ice City, because the low altitudes in the clouds, you're picking up ice like crazy. And so 2 things happened. You either got really good at your trade or you got killed. So I survived that. I started looking for a better job because I'd been away from home for 2 years, and my little boy was 4 years old. I hadn't hardly seen him. My wife was getting unhappy with me because she was having to raise our baby by herself. And I got a job flying for Brit Airways out of Terre Haute. They called me on Christmas, the day before Christmas Eve, and said that they wanted to hire me. They'd gotten my resume. And they wanted me to start ground school on January the 6th. And that was 1979, I believe. I went to work for Brit Airways. I flew for them for, I think, 5.5 or 6.5 years. They were bought out by a company called People Express. They didn't want any of our little Part 135 airplanes, which was, I was flying a Metroliner at the time, which is a 19-passenger regional airliner. And they sold all of those airplanes, so that put about 400 pilots out of work, which included myself. I was out of work a few months. I went to work for American Eagle out of Chicago. I interviewed with them. They said, well, we're really short now, and you've got more experience than almost everybody already working here, so we'll make an exception. We'll hire you as a captain, the first captain hired off the street on the Shorts 360. I said, fine. So went to ground school and got through that, took the type rating, passed it. So I was not only the first captain hired off the street, but I was the first captain that passed their check right off the street the first time.
Congratulations.
And unfortunately, I had 2 classmates in that had worked there 2 years, had like 2,000 hours in the airplane. We all 3 went to the airport about 6 in the morning to all 3 take our type check rides, which is a 2-hour flight check. Both of those guys went ahead of me because of seniority, and both of them failed their type check. I thought, my goodness, I'm in trouble. these guys have a couple thousand hours in this airplane and they can't fly it, and now I'm supposed to? I have 8 hours total time in this airplane. I thought, okay, you got to get your head straight, Larry. Just do it 1 minute at a time, one procedure at a time. So we went out. The weather was terrible. It was a raging blizzard in Marquette, Michigan. We went out for 2 hours. We went up to Duluth, got fuel. The center point fueling system on the airplane was broken. So we had to do what's called fuel over the wing. I had to climb up on top of the wing, which is about 20 feet off the ground, and fuel it by hand in this blizzard. And that wing was so slick. It's probably one of the most dangerous things I ever did in aviation. I got down off there and I said, I will never do that again. It wasn't that bad. I said, of course not. You're standing on the ground. We got back to Marquette. I shot an instrument approach to a 0 landing. In Marquette, they get so much snow, they don't have a snowplow. They use a snowblower. So the cut banks on the side of the runway were like 8 feet tall. So when you start to flare and bring your nose up, you fall into this canyon and there's no air there, and the airplane just kind of falls out from under you. So you're carrying a little bit of power all the way to the runway. The visibility was terrible because the wind is blowing this snow around in whirly winds inside that tunnel. And I told the check pilot, who was my chief pilot, I said, now, we're going to have a hard time seeing this runway. I am not going to look up until you call the runway in sight. And after 200 feet, I want you to call every 50 feet. And so we're going down. We got to 200, then 150, then 100. I said, what have you got? And he said, keep going. Well, I had the needles crossed right on the ILS. And finally he says, I think I have it. Well, by the time I looked up, the airplane touched down on the runway. I honestly, if you have your localizers centered, they are so particular on the course heading that your nose wheel will set down right on the center line of the runway. We did that. We rolled to the end. The visibility was so bad, we could not see any of the taxiways to turn off. I ended up taxiing at the nose of the airplane right up against a big snowbank. I said, I think we missed it. He says, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, we need to push back, a powered pushback. I said, I know that's not legal, but it's either that or walk a mile back to the terminal. What do you want me to do? He says, well, have you ever done that before? I said, oh, yeah. I flew DC-6s in Alaska. We power pushbacked all the time. Okay. He says, be careful on the brakes, because if you tap the brakes when you're going backwards, the airplane will tilt down and hit the tail. So we pushed back until we could see the taxiway. I said, I think that's it. What do you think? We're looking. He says, well, I guess so. It's the only low spot in the snowdrift. We finally got back to the gate. He said, now go down and put the airplane away. So I said, right. So I took it down the hangar. It took me about a half an hour to get it all tied down and the harnesses put on and the propellers tied and all the work that has to be done. And meanwhile, it is just this blizzard. And I'm coming in looking like the Pillsbury Doughboy, I am just plastered in snow. I walk in and shook off, and he's laughing at me. I said, yeah, it's easier for you to say. So he's sitting there typing at his desk, and I'm kind of worried because we were Part 91, which was more liberal regulations. You can do pretty much whatever you're capable of doing, and you're not allowed to even take a look if you're 135 or 121, which is more stringent rules. I said, well, did I pass? He agreed. He says, well, what do you think? I said, I don't think I made any bad mistakes. I said, we made a pretty low approach. And he says, yeah, we sure did. But he says, yeah, you did fine, Captain. And he got up from his table, took off his captain's bars, and gave them to me.
Oh, how wonderful.
So I still have them today. I was an Eagle captain out of O'Hare for 2 years when it was still the busiest airport in the world. So I worked there 2 years. I went to Midway Airline. I flew their regional airline for 7.5 years. They went into bankruptcy. I went back to flying as an instructor in construction for a year, and then I got hired by a corporate flight department in Springfield, and I flew the Bunamatic executive airplanes, their jet and turboprop, for 11.5 years. And then 9/11 came along and put all of us out of work for about 3 months.
Yeah.
By then I was age 60, nobody would hire me anymore because I was too old. But then they changed the rules to 63, but they still wouldn't hire me. Oh, well, you could only fly for 3 years. I said, well, I've got 5 type ratings and 4 different colored uniforms. Which color do you wear? No, we can't do that. So that put me out of professional flying except instruction.
Okay.
So I have now been a flight instructor for another 15 years. So I still am a flight instructor. I give primarily flight reviews and instrument comp checks and stuff like that. I will accept primary students, but right now I don't have any.
Okay.
So that covered about 57 years of flying for me.
Wow, that is amazing. You mentioned that you like to fly at night. Why is that instead of?
I don't know if you've ever been on a flight at night, but
Yes.
on a good, clear night like we had last night in the fall, it is the most beautiful thing you will ever see. And of course, I was flying from one city to another, but you get up there at about 8,000 feet and your visibility is 150 miles. Mm-hmm. And you come to the cities and all the colored lights and the traffic and stuff. It is just so incredibly beautiful. And then you get the moon coming up. If you have a full moon, it's what pilots call a bomber's moon. And the light is so bright you can actually see the shadows of the trees from the moon. And it's just beautiful. I absolutely love it. The air is smooth. The airplane works good. It flies faster. Everything about it is wonderful until the weather gets bad. And then it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So I still love flying at night. I go out at the airport in the middle of the night, get my airplane out, and go for a ride just because I love doing it. And I've called people to, why are you calling me at 2 o'clock in the morning? Well, don't you want to go flying? Are you nuts? Yes. I'm nuts over airplanes.
You mentioned we have landed in Denver at night, and that is very neat to see when you go into Denver.
I think one of the prettiest cities you'll ever land for in a night is Las Vegas. If you've ever been there, even in the daytime or at night, all of the casinos, the motels, and everything are skyscrapers that are all illuminated and colored neon lights and stuff. It is a beautiful city to land at, and it's a lot of fun. It's out in the desert, so there's nothing, and then you come over the mountains, and here's this gorgeous city with all these colored lights flashing and stuff. It's a beautiful city to fly into. Going into Chicago is very pretty, but these big cities, it can be very difficult to see the airport at night. So if you're not using your instruments and flying directly to a fix that lines you up at the runway, unless you've been there before, it's really hard to pick out 100 lights out of 1,000 others.
Right.
So you have a lot of new first officers, and it takes them a year to learn how to look out the window and see what they're looking for.
Is landing and taking off easier or harder when you compare, let's say, Midway to O'Hare as a pilot?
Well, both of those airports have precision runways. They have lighted centerline lighting. They have lighted taxiways. Midway and O'Hare are very comparable. All of the major cities, Chicago is considered a Class B airport, and there's only about 10 or 12 of them in the whole United States. Even the bigger airports, like Midway, is actually considered a Class C airport.
So it's a smaller size?
It's smaller and less traffic, but it falls under the restrictions and the radar of O'Hare. Springfield and Peoria, Bloomington are all three pretty busy airports, and they're Class C airports. In fact, Bloomington is a Class D airport because they do not have their own radar facility. They have a nice runway, it has precision approaches, and it has a tower, but you have to have your own radar facility to be a Class C airport, and that is dictated by traffic and how much money the government has.
Okay. Learn something new. You got any questions for Larry?
I was just going to ask, you're talking about the different ratings. Is it similar to like academic grades where A is the best and B is a step down and C is a step down?
It is. Most airline pilots, with the exception of just a handful, all require that you have a college degree plus all of your pilot certificates. That would be a minimum of commercial, multi-engine, and of course that includes the instrument, because you can't get a commercial without having an instrument rating. But most of the young people today do not have what's called the ATP, the Airline Transport Pilot Certificate, and that is considered the PhD of flying. And if you're an aviation mechanic, you have a airframe and power plant rating, and then your higher certificate is the inspection authorization. So I have both the ATP for both single and multi-engine airplanes, which is kind of rare. Not many people have an ATP on a single engine airplane. So what can you do with that? You know, you got a 4-place airplane, an airline pilot. I said, well, the rules used to be that the written was only good for 2 years. If you hadn't taken the flight check, you'd have to take the written again. And then they changed the rules to where if you flew for any of the scheduled air carriers, 121 or 135 rails, that your written would last until you resigned or you were displaced. So if the company went out of business, you lost your written. So then you had to take it again. Well, to make a long story short, I had taken the Boeing 727 flight engineer's rating 3 times because it kept expiring. And then finally, I had been doing it for so many years, nobody flew 727s anymore. So, yeah, and then a type rating is a specific airplane for an airplane that weighs more than 12,500 pounds, which is considered a transport category airplane. So I have 5 of those type ratings, and it's kind of like having a different driver's license for every semi-truck. So they have a CDL, but now they have to have a special license for a Peterbilt, for an International, for a TransStar, you know, so you can name 5 different trucks. The FAA would say, well, you have to take a special driver's license for each one of these trucks. That's what they do in airplanes. But the systems are so different and so complex that you have to be trained specifically on each airplane. In fact, the 737 has advanced so much that they now have, you still get a 737 type rating, but you have to go back to school for what they call additions, and you have to be retrained for all the stuff that's new from the original certification, and that's called differences training. And so you can get a type rating and fly an airplane that's significantly different, even though it's still called a 737, by taking the differences training on the ground. And you still take a type rating check, and you have to retake those checks every 6 months. It's an instrument check, and basically you're taking your ATP check every 6 months to make sure you're still competent. And
to be a crop duster, what kind of training does those pilots have to have?
There are specialized schools, most of them Oklahoma and Texas, that train you for, most of their training is actually on chemicals and passing the exams of handling chemicals safely. Of course, they do flight training, but you already know how to fly an airplane. It's just a matter of judgment on how high you are off the ground. And so they go out and practice fields, and they'll do practice runs with just water in the airplane. And they have 2-place crop dusters so that you have a safety pilot back there so you don't fly the thing right into the weeds. If you're driving along over a cornfield and there's a little hill in it, you're very low. It's very hard to see that there's a little hill that's 10 feet higher. So you're going up and down, following the terrain a little bit there. And so they kind of teach you what to look for, that you don't look just straight ahead, but you keep your eyes scanning to the side so that your peripheral vision picks up the differential in the altitude. And so they do train you. It's not a big deal. It's maybe a month. But I think it's very necessary. In the old days, guys that were good pilots basically trained themselves. But we just don't do that anymore because a lot of guys hurt themselves. So all of the regulations of the FAA, we say, are written in blood, because every time somebody killed themselves, they made a new rule that says, it's against the law to do this.
Right. Now, and I'm not poking fun at or, starting
I understand.
anything with wind turbines, okay, to our listeners. But with all the wind turbines that we've got, popping up everywhere, and we have now, that becomes even a bigger challenge besides the power lines, besides the hedgerow trees.
Well, years ago,
and houses.
I'm from western Nebraska, and I've owned my own airplane for 60 years. So we would make 3 trips back and forth to my parents' ranch in western Nebraska 2, 3, 4 times a year. Well, there was a time in those early years, you could fly at 200 feet all the way to Nebraska and have no concerns at all. Well, the legal altitude supposedly over an inhabited area is 500 feet. So you can't fly over any little villages. You can't fly over New Holland without being above 1,000 feet. So 1,000 feet will put you above all the wind turbines by 400 feet.
Right.
I never fly.
But for the crop dusters, though, I mean.
Well, the crop guys, they have to know where they're at, and they're marked on their charts. And most of them have electronic navigation equipment. Even in a crop duster, get them to and from the field so they don't spray the wrong field, which happens frequently. And you just ate a lot of chemical. Maybe the farmer didn't want his corn sprayed.
Yeah.
So they do have navigation sources to get there, and most those guys fly low level all the time. They know where the wind farms are, but they're just building more and more of them all the time. I'm not a big advocate of the turbines, but I'd rather build turbines than pay the sand jockeys their bill.
Yeah. No, I agree.
We have plenty of resources in our own country. All we have to do is go get them. So you do, I don't do a lot of low-level stuff anymore. In the first place, part of the fun of flying is being up there high enough that you can see everything. Well, you can't do that from 500 feet. And typically, if I'm just going on short cross countries, I'll be at 3,500. And above 3,000, you have to follow what's called the hemispherical rules. So you fly on even headings from 180 degrees to 360, odd headings from 00 to 18. So if you're flying east, you're going to fly at an odd altitude plus 500, so 3,500, 5,500, 75. If you're going west, it's all the even stuff, 25, 45, 65, and that works like that until you get to 18,000 feet. Above that is what we call the flight levels, and then the separation is not 500 feet, but it's 1,000 feet. But if you pass another airliner, which you do frequently at the flight levels, when you pass another airliner and you have a closing speed of 1,400 miles an hour, 1,000 feet looks pretty close. Almost everybody alters courses to the right a little bit, You can overtake people from the back, and it's legal to stay right on your course and fly right over the top of them. But I never did that. I altered course to the right so that I'm looking out the pilot side window at the other airplane. And a lot of people do that. The big guys, and almost everybody is bigger than what I used to fly, including the jets, but they don't alter their course for anybody.
Right, they set and go.
They think they're up there, and they've got a lot of fancy tools that'll keep track of everybody else. And most of the time that works. Once in a while they have some troubles.
At a certain altitude, the turbulence somewhat, I don't want to say, worse or, finicky, I guess, is another.
As a general rule, you get a lot more turbulence below 10,000 feet, and especially below 4,000. It's what we call surface air turbulence, or orographics, and it's caused by the wind blowing over the top of buildings and trees and stuff like that. But once you're about 400 to 3,000 feet, a lot of that will go away. But turbulence is caused by the uneven heating of the Earth. So the convection heats the Earth, the warm air rises. Well, if some warm air rises over here where it's cooler, it's going to go down. And that up and down is what gives you turbulence. Now, when you get up into the flight levels, you're away from that type of turbulence. We have what's called clear air turbulence, and it's caused by upper air waves. And those can be very severe because if you're flying in the jet stream, for example, that jet stream typically flows between 100 and 180 miles an hour. So if you're in the core of a jet stream and you're going west, you have a 200 mile an hour tailwind. And that's a good thing. But if you're going the other direction, now you have a big headwind. So you'll alter course and you'll fly 100 miles north or south of the core of that jet stream. And it moves all the time. You can't see it. You can see it on the weather maps, and you can feel it and you look down at your airspeed, your ground speed, say, oh, we're getting close to the core of this jet stream because our speed has dropped 50 knots. And the edge of that is very bumpy. And you can be driving along and hit a severe downdraft or updraft. There's no clouds, there's nothing. That's clear air turbulence. And those are the ones where you hear about the airliners diverting because they hit some turbulence and a couple passengers were hurt because the flight attendants were up walking around. There were people going to the bathroom, they didn't have their seatbelt on, and now they're hurt. They have to land and get them to the doctor. And it's not like the pilots aren't doing a good job, but you cannot see it. You can't see it on radar, but it can be very serious.
So you mentioned, training and schooling, and I did some research for our listeners, and I know of a high school, a Lincoln high schooler. He's a freshman who wants to become a pilot, who's actually taking private lessons right now. But for our listeners out there, Illinois Aviation Academy is one school. Then Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Quincy University, and then Parkland College also has an aviation department you can go to. So
we have quite a number of them around. Almost all the major schools have some flight training, and the ground school is available. There's a lot of ground schools available to the young people that's free online, and aviation companies sponsor that. So you get your written test out of the way, which is a major obstacle. It's a lot of academics, and you've got to do something besides sit on your telephone all day.
Absolutely.
Now you can you can solo when you're 15, but you have to when you're 16, and you normally have between 10 and 15 hours to solo, which means that you know how to fly the airplane. The instructor feels like you can do it by yourself. He signs off your logbook, and you go fly and make 3 takeoffs and landings. That's your solo. The first time by yourself. It's quite an exciting event. You can be a glider pilot and get a glider pilot's license when you're 14. Now the glider flies the same. The aerodynamics and the forces and everything on a glider are the same. And the Germans prior to World War II, because the armistice agreement from World War I said they could not have an air force. So they started training all their pilots on gliders. And then it was a very easy transition to put them into power airplanes. So today, if you learn to fly a glider first, then you get into the powered airplane, you'll probably solo in 5 hours.
Really?
Yeah. We had a glider club over at Monticello. We had one at Lincoln for about 15 years. We had 3 gliders and a tow plane, and one time we had 20 or 30 members. It was a lot of fun.
Do we have a lot of pilots here in Logan County?
We do.
Okay.
We have about 50 airplanes based at Logan County Airport.
Really?
And you don't realize it, but within a 5-mile circumference of Lincoln, there's about 6 other private runways.
One's out there by us. Grass, Martin's.
Yeah, Richard Martin.
Yep, Richard
I've known Richard Martin for
yeah.
over 50 years. My close friend is Alex Ulrich, lives just over here west of us a ways. He has his own airport. I taught him to fly in high school and college. He went on to the Air Force as an F-15 fighter pilot and instructor, and then became a Southwest airline pilot. Flew for Southwest for 23 years.
When I was doing some reading, I don't know if Jim and Lloyd, if you knew this, there was an airport where Walmart is right now. Correct me if I'm wrong?
Nope, that's correct. That was the original Bach Airport, B-O-C-K. And there's quite a few Bach families around yet, and they're relatives of Henry Bach, and that's who owned the airport. And those a couple of the hangars were still there when I moved here in '72, but they've since been torn down.
Was it a tornado or something, or how did it? I forgot. How was it?
Well, when they built the new airport, the airport that's Logan County Airport now in 1954, they just quit flying out of the airport.
Okay.
And so it was still there when I moved to Lincoln in 1972. And so I owned an airplane, so I thought, I'm going to go out there and land one time just so I can say I landed before they plowed it up. So I did. I landed on the grass runway, which hadn't been mowed in about a month. The grass is 6 inches tall. But I had a tailwheel airplane. It was no problem. It was not unsafe. And it was kind of cool just to say, well, yeah, I made one landing on the old Bach Airport. And, of course, the hangar was full of machinery, that had been abandoned, farm equipment they no longer used. Finally, I guess they scrapped the machinery and tore down the building. So what there is there now is a waterway down through the field there just east of Walmart.
Okay. Neat. Well, a little bit of Logan County history for you guys.
Well, there's several other private runways that were owned by farmers that have been closed. And you can have your own runway. You have to apply for the state for what's called a restricted landing area. And they come out and look at it, make sure it meets certain criteria. And it's a lot of work to own and maintain your own airport. And so the people that have got nice airports, boy, they don't just look that nice. They're not mowed without a lot of work. I mean, you and I, we spend 2 hours mowing our lawn. Imagine if you've got a runway that's 200 feet wide and 3/4 of a mile long. It takes you 1 day just to mow the runway. And you've got to do that more frequently than your lawn because airplanes don't like tall grass. It's too much drag on the wheels.
Yeah.
I've landed on lots and lots of grass runways. In fact, I learned flying off of grass, actually.
Really?
I prefer it. It's a lot easier on the airplane. Your tires never wear out. A guy I worked for owned a grass runway, and finally we changed the tires because they were so weather checked and the rubber was rotten. They weren't wore out because the grass doesn't wear them out, but finally they just have to be changed. But if you are landing on pavement all the time, you're going to wear those tires out totally in about 100 to 150 hours, depending on how you land the airplane.
What questions do you have, Lloyd? None?
I'm good, no.
You're good? Jim?
I'll ask a question.
I know he's got something. I see brewing.
All right. Let's see here. I don't know if you can hear me or not, but you say you've been flying for 57 plus years.
I got my pilot's license in 1968, I think.
So for all those hours, thousands of hours up in the air, have you ever seen anything that you didn't know what the heck it was, a UFO or something?
Well, I have seen weather balloons at very high altitudes, and when you first see them, you don't know what they are. But now they're all that mylar silver, and so they're really hard to see at the altitudes. If you don't have any clouds or something to kind of gauge where you're looking, I never saw any UFOs. I've never seen a flying saucer. At night, if you're flying through snow that's very dry, we have what's called St. Elmo's fire, and it's static electricity that builds up on the leading edge of the airplane, and it'll just outline the airplane in sparks. So it looks like the leading edge of your airplane is on fire. And if you reach up and touch the metal on the airplane, a spark will jump an inch and shock you right on your finger. It's not dangerous. It's not going to blow the airplane up. But the first time you see it, it's pretty eerie because you just see this film of fire all over the airplane. It's about an inch away from the leading edge. And it's created by air separating by the airplane and the discharge of positive and negative electrons. It's pretty cool. It's called St. Elmo's fire.
That
Now,
is neat.
this is a different thing, but one of the prettiest things, if you're flying on top of a cloud layer and you're real close to it, the top of the clouds are smooth, if you get the sun behind you, you will have a complete prism or rainbow. You'll see the shadow of the airplane, and then it'll have a rainbow all the way around it, just because of the refraction of the moisture. And for years, I took picture of that. I think I have one picture that finally came out that you can see the full rainbow with the shape of the airplane in the middle. It's real hard to get that picture, and you have to be within about 200 feet of the surface of the clouds. So there's a lot of amazing things to see.
That is neat. So if people are interested in getting their license or, just finding out more about aviation, how can they contact you and sit down and visit with you and pick your brain, so to speak?
I gave you my business card with a picture of my airplane on it. My personal cell phone is 217-737-6074. I absolutely love to talk to new people that are interested in flying. That's why I'm still a flight instructor. I never was a flight instructor just to build hours. I was a flight instructor because I got so much value out of helping people meet their own goals. And there's nothing more fun than seeing a kid solo for the first time and how excited they get. I remember me, I was just in orbit over that, and that was 60 years ago, There's no age limit on how old you can be a pilot. As long as you have a medical of some kind, you're legal to go flying. You still have to do your 3 takeoffs and landings within 90 days to carry a passenger. But if you're just going to fly yourself, you can go out there anytime you want to, day and night, and whatever the weather rating is that you are licensed for, you can go flying. Mm-hmm. There's still a lot of freedom out there, and I love doing it. I love to bring people into aviation, young, older, in between. I've taught kids that were 13 years old to fly. I've taught gentlemen that were 75 years old to fly. My oldest female pilot was 61 when she got her pilot's license. I know for sure 4 females that became airline captains, but I have trained hundreds of pilots.
And there's lots of jobs out there for pilots.
There are now. There's just, right now is just amazing because there's going to be such a demand for pilots. In fact, they're bringing in foreign pilots and foreign students to fly our airplanes, which is very frustrating to me. For years, it's like, okay, the airline wants you to be bionic, have 7 years of college, and work for minimum wage. That's why there was a shortage of pilots,
Right.
But now there actually is a shortage. They need more pilots than are currently being trained. And so finally the airlines are getting smart, and they have these ABITO programs where they start you into a college level program when you go to school and train you to end up in the cockpit of one of their airplanes.
Have you ever flown a King Air? The King Airs, have you?
I say I got like 5,000 hours in King Airs. Yeah, I've flown King Airs.
Well, I know you and I were talking, and I told you last night that I have done a check ride in a Lear 35A.
You were riding along with it?
I was riding along.
Yeah.
No, not pilot, but I got to ride along with Harold and that pilot that was
So I've
having to
flown
do his
about
check rides.
5 categories of King Airs. When I started out with Brit Air, we had a King Air called a Beech 99. It said right on it, Beech 99 King Air. Well, that was our little commuter airliner. It held 11 passengers, I believe. That's been 50 years ago almost. And I flew that run out of Springfield to Meigs for 3 years. I probably have 1,000 landings at Meigs Airport before they plowed it up. But then my last King Air, when I flew for Bunamatic, we had a 300 and then a 350, and they're fabulous airplanes. They're so comfortable, they're so fast, they're so quiet. And we also had a Beech jet, but if the King Air took off going to White Plains, New York first, the jet would just be taxiing in when we landed. So there was about 100 knot difference in speed, but on that distance of 3 hours, we'd catch up with them. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a lot of difference. And a lot of times our executives would take the King Air just because it was so much more comfortable. It was 50% bigger than the jet. And I flew the jet for them a few hours, but I didn't like it. It hurt my back really. I've always had back issues since I was a child. And the seats in that airplane just killed me. Oh, these are Learjet seats. These are great seats. I said, if these are Learjet seats, I never want to sit in one again. Besides that, it's very cozy getting into the cockpit. You have to be so careful stepping in there because you have to step across about 18 inches of console with all those buttons and switches and avionics. And if you drag your toe across that console, you're going to do $25,000 damage. We actually had a plastic case, if you will, that we set on top of that console before we got in and out of the airplane so that our toes didn't touch any of those switches.
Yeah. Those cockpits are pretty small.
They are
those
tiny.
Lears. They really are.
Yeah. Of course, that's why they go so fast.
Well, folks, that will do us now for Viewpoint. We greatly appreciate it. Larry, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I know you've got a meeting at 9 o'clock. We'll get you out of here.
Well, I'm sorry.
No, there's no need to apologize.
I
It's very
talked too
interesting.
much, and you never got to answer me any real questions.
I did ask questions. No, it's great. It is enjoyable, and we may have part 2 of Larry Whitbeck coming up in a few months.
Well, as a matter of fact, we could do a show on being an aviation mechanic.
We could do that too. We will.
Because there's a real need for maintenance people as well as pilots,
Neat.
and there's a lot of opportunities there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, folks, I'll do this for now. The Lord and weather willing, we'll be back next week.
This live video stream is made possible in part by WLCN's live stream technology sponsor, Me Realty, located at 602 Keokuk Street in Lincoln, and online at merealty.com. This program is a presentation of WLCN 96.3 FM and WLCNonline.com.